Welcome to the Voices of Ecosystems.
Welcome to today's session, Voices of Ecosystem podcast. Today, I have another inspiring guest in the series of this podcast or vlogcast series, Robert Bach from BEAM, which is the corporate innovation program or a corporate startup program of Bäumer Group. What is Bäumer Group and what is Bäumer Group doing? You will explain it in a second. First of all, welcome to this session, Robert. I'm really happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. I was wondering whether you would say Bach also, because if you only say Robert, then it must signal that I'm super famous, which I'm not. But thanks anyway for having me. Really looking forward to this.
Perfect. Robert and myself, we know each other now for, let me think about, it's a long time ago. We know each other from our studies. Actually, it was, I think, in the end of the 19s, in the beginning of the 2000s when we were meeting first time. So long time ago.
And 1999.
True. And now you made very interesting steps after the studies. We will talk about that later. You were a startup founder and now, as I said, in charge for this corporate innovation program. And maybe you will just introduce yourself in a couple of sentences so that we get an idea what you're currently doing.
All right. My name you have already given away. I'm living and working in Berlin. Mostly. I used to travel more. Now it's web meetings as for everyone else. I live here with my wife and two small daughters. I'm originally from Mönchengladbach, so close to where you are dialing in at the moment. Studied in Mannheim, that you already mentioned. After Mannheim, I started my work-life balance in Munich as a consultant for Roland Berger, as they say of themselves, the largest international strategy consultancy of European origin. I did that for 3 years. Then in 2010, I moved to Berlin together with two colleagues to launch Coffee Circle, still up and running and growing. It's an e-commerce company for coffee and accessories and a social business also. And after 7 years, I left Coffee Circle. Martin, one of my co-founders, is now running it on its own to set up BEAM, which is a company builder for the Mittelstand intralogistics company Bäumer Group, 100% family owned. One of the jewels of German Mittelstand, not from Bavaria, but from Westphalia.
And what is Bäumer doing actually? Maybe not everyone knows it so far, but hopefully after your pitch.
Yeah, I would be surprised. Well, given your audience, some people may actually know it, but it's not a consumer brand. It's deep within B2B. As I said, it's intralogistics, and they come from a town called Beckum, which used to be the center of the cement industry in northern Westphalia. And cement moves over conveyor belts, first horizontally, then vertically in the oven. And from the cement industry, they branched out towards the end of production lines where they do filling, packaging, palletizing, and stretch wrapping. And during the last 10 years, very successfully into the airport and CAP. So let's call it postal industries as well. The postal industry is built around very large sortation and distribution centers where postal parcels are sorted at high speeds, something like 60, 70, 80,000 parcels per hour, fully automatically. And as we've all flown in the past, we know that there is a baggage handling system. And the baggage handling system fully automatically handles all the luggage at the airports and brings it from check-in to airside, from where it's loaded to the aircraft. So they do everything around conveyor belts.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's also a good starting point for ecosystems, because I think these kind of mobility settings or transportation settings are dedicated, I can say, for ecosystem business models. So maybe I can admit that we were working also together a long time ago. I think like 2 or 3 years ago, also as one of the first companies we were working with the Ecosystemizer to thought that a little bit. But maybe you can give us some insights. Where is the ecosystem topic relevant, and what is your connects to that, meaning the business ecosystem issue in particular?
Yeah, so there are many ways to answer the question. I'll try one way, and then you can pull me back if you were going towards it from a different angle. For us at Beam, the Ecosystemizer is a very, very valuable tool. Going one step back for Bäumer Group, it would be also very valuable. And Bäumer Group unknowingly did something that could be very well analyzed with the Ecosystemizer. Like I said, they came from their core competency in that certain industry or life need area, conveyor belts, just moving stuff from A to B over a conveyor belt. And then they branched out with their core technology into different life need areas, into different ecosystems, and very successfully, because I believe it does make sense. And they did that based on opportunity and intuition. We at Beam, we are launching companies as in company building. So we are approaching it not so much from an opportunistic revenue, customer wants something based on existing technology point of view or angle. We are analyzing what we could do in order to leverage all the unfair advantages, as we call it. So all the advantages that we have because Bäumer Group is behind us.
What particularly is your unfair advantage or your unfair advantages?
Yeah. It's especially access to relevant and not obvious, so not very well known problems of Bäumer Group's customers. It's customer access, initially for the problem falsification, later on for selling, if we have a startup and if the startup has a product. It's also access to experts, and it could be access to hardware capabilities and products, but that's based on the business model. So we normally don't develop hardware ourselves. There's a saying in Berlin, hardware is hard. We try to stay within software. It's where we have the highest probability of building a very large and profitable business. But depending on the business model, we sometimes have to fall back on the hardware that Bäumer Group is controlling, installing anyway. There could be the hardware itself, but it's mostly the high-level control software. So doing something with the hardware, for example, at airports or at postal sortation centers.
What about data? What is the role of data? How important is that? Or in what context is that relevant for your new business or new ecosystem ideas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, data is everything. So an open question and an all-encompassing answer. It's all about data. But it's not about the collection of data or visualizing the data. This is both pretty trivial. It's understanding the data and also trying to understand the data from our point of view for a certain ecosystem. So I don't want to say platform because then everyone thinks about monopolies and profits. It's more about building solutions that also enable others.
That's a good definition. And can you give us some examples? Maybe also from Bäumer on the one hand, like the group, what kind of examples what kind of solutions they develop with this ecosystem perspective, and maybe also from your home turf, meaning from Beam, what is there the ecosystem aspect in your ideas, in your companies you are building up?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a big fan of the Ecosystemizer approach. I think it gives you, I always call it a compass, right? You have your strategic journey from A to B. It's an indirect answer to your question. The world around you changes all the time, as it would be if you would be hiking, for example. And whereas when you're hiking, the landscape changes. It's the competitive landscape that changes when you are doing business, especially on a longer time span. And then in order to recalibrate where are you going and how fast are you going, you need some kind of compass. And the Ecosystemizer compass for me is make, partner, buy. So what to do in order to get to your strategic goal. It helps us a lot. It also helps certain people in Bäumer Group a lot who were in that workshop with you together. So everyone tasked with innovation, digitization, which is a catch-all marketing phrase for the generational shift that is going on in technology, internal and external relations of every company. And it's very much people-driven. So there are people inside Bäumer Group that know the Ecosystemizer and with whom I can talk Ecosystemizer. But higher up in the C-level, we've discussed the presentations, but it is people-driven. So it depends very much on who wants to work with this tool. And if a certain person has a tool, then it's pretty hard to change and to have that common language to work with the Ecosystemizer only. So for us, when we discuss where we want to go, and we are pretty independent in our approach to digitizing Bäumer Group's products, it depends on the person I'm talking with.
And once again, that's great that you're mentioning how we were, and I can agree, we were collaborating really great together. But can you make some examples? So you were saying you are kind of in the role of an enabler of enabling other companies or even other ecosystems. In which fields? Can you be a little bit more concrete? In Bäumer as well as in Beam, just to get an idea. You mentioned, I know you mentioned the industries, let's call it like that, but maybe you can mention also the solutions which you created or which you're about to create.
Yeah, well, if we go through first big difference is, are we talking about Bäumer Group or are we talking about Beam?
Both, maybe. I'm interested in both.
Maybe Yes, I will, like you said. So when we're talking about Bäumer Group, it's adding something fairly obvious for the entire industry, because then in every industry, it's about market share. If we talk about Beam, it's very, very focused, because for Beam, we are always trying, with every startup, we're trying to tackle one problem for one Bäumer customer type. So it's not working for Bäumer Group, it's working alongside Bäumer Group. Completely different approach.
True.
For Bäumer Group, thinking about the Ecosystemizer, thinking about data and what to do with data, it's obviously very different based on the ecosystem you're operating in. Airports are local monopolies. If I said that correctly, monopolies. Yeah, not so much a bit if you zoom out, because then London is in competition with, I don't know, saying anything now, Stockholm or Amsterdam or Hamburg, because everyone is looking to attract transfer passengers. But they are local monopolies, and it's a very security-driven area. So for an airport, you only get the data much later. You never get live data, and then it's not about sharing, right? Because it's so security heavy. For the cab industry, it's not a monopoly, it's an oligopoly. So you have a certain number of large players, everyone knows them, and they do, let's say, 4 or 5 services, and they distribute all the parcel traffic between them. So whenever you build something based on data, it's also fairly closed, and only the OEM, so the manufacturer, can leverage the insight he gets from the data and sell it to others as well, right? But there's no data sharing. If you now think about the production industry, and that's for Bäumer Group, everything around, fairly, it's granulat in German, right? So it could be products, food, chemicals, so everything at the end of the production line that needs to be filled, palletized, packaged, it's optimizing the production process. And when you optimize the production process, but you are not responsible for the entire production system, you have to have an approach towards data that enables including other manufacturers, because there are a lot of manufacturers that supply machines through a production environment. And then it's more about open standards, data sharing, and building joint solutions that are a win for everyone in the ecosystem. That's the machine operator, that's tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, maybe also service teams that do maintenance and repair, or service providers.
And with Beam, once again, maybe you can come back to that. There are some examples for some specific solutions. As you said, they are very very, very sharp, where you say, okay, this is a case where you have this ecosystem cooperation as a good example from one of your startups, where you say, this is a good example to demonstrate this ecosystem thinking.
Yeah. A very good example I would like to name is Sparrow, one of our startups, a small minority ownership. So that's really a textbook, very, very nice startup launch, where more than 80% of the startup is owned by the founding team. They are building ecosystem solution for spare parts. The URL is sparrow.parts. And Meir and his team building a company based on the insight that everyone who has machinery more or less has the same spare parts. But these spare parts, only the OEM, only the supplier understands these spare parts. Which spare part could you build in? And they are the only point of supply, right? But for every spare part, there are also alternatives. Companies stock too many spare parts. And looking at it from the point of the OEM, it's fine if it's needed. It's obvious that machine operators will continue to have a lot of spare parts. But if they need a certain spare part, then Sparrow enables them to get spare parts from other machine operators in completely different ecosystems. And while they do that, they can also share data on which other spare parts might be used, share data on the probability of a spare part failing, share data on when a spare part is discontinued, how much of it is available in the entire ecosystem. So just because spare parts are everywhere and the market potential is thus huge, the business value of this ecosystem approach to spare parts handling is enormous. And it's very important to say, the team is building it in a way that it's beneficial for everyone, including the OEMs, for which spare parts are a very profitable part of their business.
It's very interesting because you also open up these two paths. One path is efficiency, and the other one is add-on services. Yeah, and if you see these two, that are not contradictions, but that are two different ways of ecosystem business models in the B2B industry. When you look at your portfolio, or even in Bäumer, in the topics they are addressing, is it more the efficiency thing, or is it more the add-on service thing? Or is it not really easy to, or not really simple to differentiate between these both?
You will only be able to sell to a business customer if you improve something that is of relevance to him.
Mm-hmm.
Of relevance to someone working inside a company is the KPI on which his pay is based. Let's say his bonus. The most well-known KPI in terms of production is the overall equipment effectiveness. True. At this point, I'm not sure if it's effectiveness or efficiency. It's always referred to as OEE, but it was the first part of your prompt. So that's what you sell. You sell something that improves the availability of the operations.
The other one could be services like that the other company is making more sales, making more business, and trying kind of consulting services, or even develop joint business models together to make more sales. That could be the other dimension. But as I understood now, it's more the OEE, which is the most relevant focus you have. And this is not a surprise, I would say, if you agree, because we see that also with other big companies. I mean, I had here in one of the first sessions, or in the first session, Dennis Krechting from who is actually doing research for machine engineering companies very thoroughly, and he's actually has the opinion that it's like this. It's very efficiency driven, and that there's still huge potential because there's still so much inefficiencies in the classical value chains, which you can solve and address by new business models, data-driven business models.
If you say inefficiency, I was going to talk about exactly the same point. I don't think from any individual company perspective, it is something to be ashamed of. I think that, like I said, it's obviously a generational shift in terms of business processes, just because of what digitization enables. So the application of software and of the compute power and everything that goes with it. And every business I know with, and we talk with a lot of different businesses along the supply chain, every business I know of is probably 10, maybe 15% towards where it could be. And it's completely normal.
Yeah.
And just talking about ecosystems and relevant problems, it's super important to have that customer dialogue and to understand what potential customers for Bäumer Group, I don't really care because I don't sell Bäumer Group problems, but potential customers for the products of our startups are capable of working with at the moment. Because there's so many, let's call it low-hanging fruits, that are also stick to the tree because of all the legacy software systems, right? It's not as agile and greenfield as it would be for startups. No, there's so much legacy decisions and software architecture and applications behind it.
Totally agree. So maybe the next question builds the bridge to the other industry you worked before, but I would like to stick with this ultimate question once again in the intralogistics industry, because with our concepts and with our research, we say in the center of all should be the human being, meaning we as the end customer. Now we were talking a lot about inefficiencies, whether they are justified or not, and I agree with you, but what role does the human play for your startups, for your your solutions, let's call it like this, is it just that you have to take into account that there is at the end also somebody who gets the parcel who is flying, or is it even more or even less? So what is the role of the human in ecosystems also from the B2B side?
There are two aspects to my answer, I would say. So from my point of view, the golden rule of a successful B2B business model is it decreases the time and the cost of a certain process across many different companies, ideally across different industries. And then if you manage to do that in one industry, then Ecosystemizer kicks in. You can also do it in a different industry. That means your business model is successful. If we're looking at the humans behind it, it's partly the process, but also the well-being. Process would be something like our company Codet, which has built an API to connect e-commerce companies with fulfillment providers. E-commerce company collects the order, the fulfillment provider ships the parcel. That one-to-one connection is super expensive, boring, and static to build, and they have built an API. So very costly developers can focus on doing something more productive, more entertaining, more innovative, and building a competitive advantage. All right, that's really business talk, right? So in the end, the profit and loss statement benefits. On the other hand, we have an application such as Elara, and at the shop floor at the moment, the production workers, the blue collar workers that run the machinery to produce something or that do maintenance and repairs, they don't have a digital solution. A company like SAP builds for the desktop computer somewhere in the manager's office. There's no solution I know of that is building an interface for the people that actually do the work on the shop floor, or that do a different kind of work on the shop floor. And here Elara comes in. So at the moment, every bit of knowledge, what happened at the machinery, did I hear something, what did I change during my shift, all of that is still written down in sticky notes, which is crazy. And Elara is applying a certain number of technologies for these people so that they can interact voice-driven, picture-driven, also text-driven with a mobile phone app. And this greatly improves the flow of their work and also their work satisfaction. Because for them then, it's much easier to find relevant information and also to interact with their colleagues. It's crazy that so far no one built something for them to enable them to do their work better. And the feedback that the team got is enormously positive because people are so happy that someone is helping them, right? Whereas before they only had sticky notes.
That's really interesting. The software industry forgets the blue collar workers in general and is focusing just on the office people.
Right, you always build for someone you know. You build for yourself, so to say.
Yeah, that's
otherwise it's painful. Otherwise you have to get to people with whom you might not normally interact, right? You have to have that insight. You have to make an effort to find out what is their problem. And it's so skewed. We obviously all read the statistics in terms of the ongoing pandemic, but if I'm not mistaken, 20% of the workers in Germany are able to work from home. So 80% are not, but these 20% are the ones that get all the fancy new software tools.
Absolutely. And maybe I just take over your statement. You build something for yourself, because that brings me to the question, your startup you founded, and you were mentioning it, Coffee Circle. Mm-hmm. Is it also something you built for yourself because you're a coffee aficionado, or are there some other reasons? That's the first question. And obviously we have to come back to the ecosystem topic. Maybe you can also elaborate a little bit about that. Was that an ecosystem company as well, or what was the business model behind? Maybe you can, or is it today? So maybe these two questions together.
Yeah. You're much stronger than I am in terms of on the fly applying a certain product to different life need areas. So I say something about Coffee Circle and answer the first part of your question, then I play it back to you, right? In terms of
great, okay,
which life need areas is the business model of Coffee Circle addressing? I didn't start Coffee Circle because I wanted better coffee. Okay. I was not the strongest coffee drinker. I drank espresso, and apart from espresso, I drank tea, because I didn't like filter coffee. And then working at Roland Berger, I had back in the days, like over 10 years ago, I had two colleagues both of which were heavily driving a student project of theirs, which was building a school for orphaned girls in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa. And we were doing a 4-week unpaid leave to help on the last steps of the completion of the school there. And while being in Ethiopia, we came into contact with coffee. Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee, has the highest variety of coffee, is excellent tasting coffee. And we thought, okay, this is something where we could leverage the power of the internet. We could make it very transparent where the coffee comes from. And we could also give the money back directly to the farmers and implement social projects ourselves based on what they need. The top 3 causes of sickness in Africa are all based on polluted drinking water, for example. I won't go into more detail, but it's really, really unpleasant. On top of that, education is obviously a very large lever. You improve health or you improve education, and people have automatically the capacity to build a better future for themselves. Right, based on that, we launched Coffee Circle, and the web shop is still online. You can see where your coffee comes from, and when you buy coffee, you have to select a development project which you want to support, and later on there's information on how the project was implemented and on the impact of the project. Now, this applies to private customers based on their coffee consumption, but maybe you can come on the fly. You can come up with different needs, right? There might
Absolutely.
be the need to change the world, to do something spiritual.
I think connected people in your platform or in your community talking about how they use the coffee, what they are doing, etc.
Mm-hmm. And they're also the business customers, right? So for businesses, it also plays a role. 30% of the revenue of Coffee Circle is done by business customers. Many, many, many companies.
I agree. So it's true that you build up an ecosystem with different angles to set it up, to make it also stronger against classical web shops, let's call it like this. And it's not just exclusively the purpose-driven component you just mentioned. It's the social component. It's, of course, it's the consumption and the nutrition component and of course, the quality, etc., all of that. But it's all of that together, which makes it so special. That's what I see from the outside, at least.
Yeah. So for coffee, I can't help but correct you there. When you mean nutrition, it's actually how well it is for your stomach. So based on the way coffee is roasted, it's the bean inside the coffee cherry. So it's the bean, it's a fruit. No, not the bean is the fruit, but it's the core of a fruit. It has acids. And if you roast it in the old school way, not the industrially roasted coffee, then these acids are roasted out of the coffee and it doesn't irritate your stomach. A lot of people say, coffee always gives me stomach problems. It's because they drink cheap coffee that was roasted very, very efficiently, very quickly. And there's a lot of acids still in the coffee beans. But that was not what I'm hinting at. What I was going after. I really like that you brought up the stickiness or the differentiation of a product if it addresses certain life needs. A couple of years ago, I talked with the then head of communication with Zalando, and he was working on C-level. And responsible for all external communication of Zalando and also for the brand positioning. And he said that he always warns the management board that Zalando is very replaceable because it's just a really convenient and well done place to shop for clothes and shoes a couple of years ago, right? And he said everything that's not above 20%, which is the baseline growth of e-commerce year over year, everything that's not above 20% is kind of a failure because it shows that there is very little differentiation. Mm-hmm. And I'm still not happy with what Zalando does. Like, who am I to say? But it's just my opinion. I'm still not happy with what Zalando does in terms of leveraging all its power to bring more transparency to the supply chain and to work towards change in the supply chain. But if they would do, that would be one angle to make them less replaceable by the likes of About You, Otto, Amazon, right? They're all just web shops that do marketing in a different way. So I agree, there needs to be something else apart from a nice user interface and quick fulfillment.
Absolutely true. And we are almost at the end. The pre-ultimate part is, what is your suggestion to others with your experience now to think about ecosystem business models, to start them? Is there anything you have learned or any do's and don'ts? What would you recommend others in your situation with this ecosystem perspective?
Mm-hmm. My suggestion would be to react less and think more.
Mm-hmm.
And I would make sure that someone inside your organization who can bring people together, brings them together, and then it can be lower down in the organization. Ideally, it's higher up, because then the lever and the return on thinking is automatically higher. And then you think about what you could do to improve your odds of surviving the future, because the future is completely unknown. And all you can do to prepare is to make sure to be close to solving your customers' needs and problems as good as possible, which almost by definition, you will not be able to do internally, because every large company was successful in the past because it did something right in the past. But the world is changing, and the pace of change is increasing and increasing and increasing. The half-life of facts and of knowledge and of processes is decreasing ever more quickly. The closer you are to software, the more rapidly everything changes. So in order to stay relevant, to protect your job and to protect your business, you need to think. If you're thinking about where to go, then the Ecosystemizer is a great tool in thinking about how to get there. Do I want to build my future? Do I want to buy my future, M&A, for example, or do I want to partner with someone who has a technology or a capability and integrate it in any way? So yeah, that's my recommendation. And it's really easy to pay lip service to that thinking, and it's really hard to do, because in order to do it, you need to make time in your calendar, and you need to collect like-minded people in your organization, bring them together and think.
So I also totally agree, because it's also my experience working together with many corporations and top managers. And so I think your suggestions are absolutely great for also for others who can reflect that. And even if you said you cannot tell us how the future is, I try to ask you anyways. So what do you think, where will be the ecosystem topic in 3 years, especially for your company, the intralogistics industry? Is there any trends or any like suggestions where you think which will happen in the next 3 years from an ecosystem perspective?
Yeah, for sure. I think everything that can be automated will be automated. More and more will be automated as the software or compute capabilities increase, and they will increase. And I don't think this is bad. I think it just frees a lot of people up to do value-adding work instead of repetitive work. So that's the one big trend, kind of non-obvious. And the other one is definitely augmented reality. The capabilities of augmented reality through your smartphone or through dedicated equipment will also increase as the connectivity increases, and then it will make people more independent, and it will also increase the service level.
And there you need partners, and then we are back in the ecosystem.
Definitely.
So
yeah. You would be foolish to build many parts of the solution yourself. You should definitely partner.
And thank you. And maybe the really ultimate question now, which I ask to everybody here, is there anything where you use ecosystem thinking also in your private life? Or do you eat your own dog food or drink your own champagne, as we say that? So are you also an ecosystem driven person? And if so, where is there any example, or how can you describe that? Or isn't that the case?
Yeah, I once co-founded a social business, so it's part of my nature. We can go into more detail here as in terms of personality types, but I'm someone who tries to impose his view of how things should be on his environment. So I'm very normatively driven, so to say. And a lot of people also in the startup ecosystem of Berlin, very much driven by fame or money only, right? And they have what we call in German Scheuklappen, and they do only that. They have great talents, they have a great attitude, but they are only going for their own benefit. And I'm not sure if this is what you mean. And I'm not trying to point myself in a particularly good light, because for sure I could also do more. I'm trying to apply my strength also to my neighborhood and my surrounding where I can. Inside the house I live, inside the kita to which my kids go.
That's great. Actually, I don't like to tend in a certain direction. This question is really very open, and I think it should reflect, at least for some seconds, okay, where is this ecosystem thinking also relevant maybe in my life? And I think this is a great answer, at least for me also, because as I said, I asked that to every person, and I always get at least a slight different answer and different perspective. That's why I really like it so much to ask it. So, Robert, once again, thank you so much to having you here. I think myself and hopefully everybody who's listening to that has learned a lot, starting from the intralogistics industry about coffee beans to ecosystem in private life. So we had a variety of topics and I think some really good, even very deep answers to reflect. And so thank you once again that you took the time to be here, and looking forward also for further talks. So thank you so much.
Thank you for Ecosystemizer.